Hi, my name is Dr. Ronaldo Correa, and I'm a hospitalist at Brigham and Women's Hospital and a CardioNerds Academy House Chief. Join me for the AHA Scientific Sessions 2024 from November 16th to 18th in Chicago, with pre-sessions, symposia, and early career day on November 15th. This year is special because it marks AHA's 100th birthday, and we will have exciting programming like cardiogenic shock masterclass in the simulation zone. The CardioNerds Conference scholars will be there too, so visit scientificsessions.org to register.
And when registering, be sure to use the code NERDS, because if you're among the first 20 to sign up, you'll receive a free 1-year AHA professional membership. And with that, let's get to the show.
Worldwide, cardiovascular disease affects the lives of hundreds of millions. Dedicated cardio nerds everywhere are working hard to fight this global epidemic. These are their stories.
Welcome to the 4th Annual Sanjay V Desai Lecture in Medical Education. This lecture has become one of my favorite parts of the Academy year because the chance for us to come together as a community of educators and really get into the science and nitty-gritty of what it means to teach, what it means to learn, what it means to grow in this digital age that we're all engaged in as CardioNerds Academy members. Now, the topic of this lecture is something that I think is going to be really interesting for all of us, which is the role of artificial intelligence in medical education. And this is something that's really become a big speaking point, not just in cardiology, not just in medicine, but really in almost every facet of life. People are trying to figure out how to use this new technology in the common world. And this lecture is also going to be a really exciting point because it allows us to celebrate our graduating Academy members in the CardioNerds Academy and also welcome our incoming CardioNerds Academy members, which is something we're incredibly proud of, the work that everyone's done and the work that everyone continues to do as educators in this space. And I think what really makes CardioNerds special is not just the work that we do creating tutorials, educational podcasts, infographics, but also the community that we get to build here. And that's really what makes this so exciting for me. And that's what I'm just so proud to be a part of. Speaking of community, it's my honor to introduce the namesake of this lecture, Dr. Sanjay Desai. Sanjay, I think for many of us needs no introduction, but he's the Program Director Emeritus of the Osler Internal Medicine Training Program at Johns Hopkins Hospital. He's the current Chief Academic Officer of the American Medical Association. He's a global leader in medical education, and for so many cardio nerds, he's a mentor, advisor, and friend. And it's our immense pleasure to have him here and to have this lecture named in his honor. So thank you so much, Sanjay, for being here today.
I'm just continue to be humbled by even having my name associated with this, and I'm here to learn. So thank you for inviting me.
It's also my honor to introduce our Rising Academy Chiefs who will be joining me in this discussion today. And these are going to be leaders, and not just in CardioNerds, but leaders in education and cardiology going forward. And we're just so proud to work with them. A huge thank you to Dr. Callie Clark, Dr. Claire Cambron, Dr. Ronaldo Correa Fabiano, and Dr. Rachel Goodman.
Thank you so much, Tommy. I'm very excited to be able to introduce Dr. Berlacher. Dr. Kathryn Berlacher graduated from The Ohio State University from medical school and completed her internal medicine residency, chief residency, and cardiology fellowship at UPMC, joining faculty in 2012. She earned her master's degree in medical education from the University of Pittsburgh shortly after. She has served as a program director of the Cardiovascular Fellowship Program since 2015 and leads numerous educational efforts in both the residency and medical school. In 2021, she was named Associate Chief of Education for UPMC Heart Vascular Institute, overseeing education across the service line. Dr. Berlacher also serves as an administrative leader in a variety of capacities, including as director of the McGee Women's Heart Program and Chief of Medicine at McGee Women's Hospital. Nationally, she is the current chair for the American College of Cardiology's Annual Scientific Sessions for 2025 and 2026. She leads multiple ACC courses and regularly speaks about women's cardiology, medical education, diversity and inclusion, and health equity.
Thanks so much for having me today. I can't be more excited to be with this crew that really is humbling on many, many levels. So thanks for that really nice introduction.
Thanks, Dr. Berlacher. I'm Claire. I am honored to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Alfred Shoukry, who graduated from Northwestern University with dual degrees in neurobiology and biomedical engineering. He completed his medical school in internal medicine residency training at UPMC and earned a certificate in medical education through the Institute for Clinical Research at the University of Pittsburgh. He serves as core faculty at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine and cares for patients at the VA in Pittsburgh. He is the course director for Population Health, a course for second-year medical students. He has taught topics including patient safety, quality improvement, the effect of environmental change on health, and bioinformatics. He is keenly aware of the effect of large language models on medical education and has presented about them at both local and national meetings regarding their use in medical education. Thank you for being here, Dr. Shoukry.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and see so many familiar faces. There's a sentence in there from AI, but I won't say which one. You can guess.
Hi, Dr. Shoukry. It's good to see you. Hi, everyone. I'm Ronaldo. I'm very, very excited to introduce our star speaker, Dr. McNeil. Dr. McNeil received her undergraduate degree from Princeton University, her MD degree from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, and a Master of Public Health from the University of Pittsburgh. She's a professor emeritus of medicine at the University of Pittsburgh and has recently joined the faculty at Brown University as a professor of medicine, where she's a member of the Division of General Internal Medicine and will serve as an academic hospitalist and as a senior consultant to the Women's Health Education Group at VA Central Office. Her special interest as an educator have been the development of training programs designed to develop leaders in women's health education and research, and in the faculty development of educators. She has been widely recognized both locally and nationally for her achievements in medical education and women's health. She was named the Society of General Internal Medicine Distinguished Professor of Women's Health in 2014, and in 2016 received their Career Achievement in Medical Education, which recognizes an outstanding clinician educator for their lifetime contributions to medical education, both at their institution and nationally.
Thank you, Ronaldo. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you all for being here. And I think this is going to be a really provocative, really interesting talk. So I'm going to hand it to Dr. Berlacher, who's going to be our guide to learn more about artificial intelligence medical education here today.
Got it. Thanks, Tommy. Thanks for those great introductions. Dr. Desai, it is a pleasure to meet you. I'm really honored to have you on. I'm going to start actually with some just really demographics for those of us who publish, this is the good first kind of thing that you should do, table one, right? So maybe our table one of this podcast is to see kind of where we all are. So I invite anybody who is on and recording with us really to give some short answers here. And I'll go to the Chiefs first. Of the Chiefs that are on, can you unmute yourself slowly one at a time and tell me if you've ever used ChatGPT?
Yes, I have.
Okay, great. And Callie, stay on just for a second.
Sure.
How often do you use it?
Probably at least once a week.
Okay, and what do you use it for?
Honestly, a lot of things like recipes, ways to rephrase sentences that I need
Okay.
rephrased, short snippets for like research, things like that.
Great. Do you use it in patient care at all?
Sometimes translating like patient education materials.
Okay. All right, great. Tommy, I'm going to go to you next. Do you use ChatGPT? If so, how often and for what?
Man, I'm going to feel like the Luddite here.
This is exactly why we're doing this.
I've never used it in a medical sense. I think I once or twice have like put some things in there just to see, like Google search just to see, but I've never used it in patient care and I've never used it in teaching. So I'm very excited to see about all the potentials for it today.
That's great. And I think there's some reasons for that. I'm going to skip over to Missy. Missy, how often do you use ChatGPT, if at all?
So it's interesting. I would say I'm sort of a voyeur. I find ChatGPT really interesting. Have done some work in trying to understand it, how it works. We did a study at Brown where we undertook and submitted letters of evaluation, for example, that were written for medical students applying to residency. And we asked faculty to evaluate the letters, and we asked ChatGPT to evaluate the letters and tried to rank them and see how they. Now, I would say I'm playing with it. I'm not using it, is how I would describe my
Thank you for that context. Alfred, how often do you use Chat GPT or other generative AI, and for what?
I use it a fair amount and for all sorts of stuff. I use it in medical education and actually used it just a couple weeks ago when I was trying to think of questions to put on a quiz, and I could give it the topic and it could make suggestions. And then my brother-in-law is a computer programmer who lives in San Francisco, who just thinks AI is going to rule the world next year, basically. And so I told him I was doing this podcast and I said, do you have any suggestions for how you can use AI in medical education? And he said, ask ChatGPT.
Yes, I have done that. Actually, I have done that. Thanks, Alfred, for that. Any else who has not ever logged on to ChatGPT or does not have an account or tried any generative AI? I'm curious if there's anybody else on here.
Yeah, I was just raising my hand to the fact that I've never used it before. I heard about it.
Can I ask why, Miriam?
I didn't have enough information about it, and I've never my sister would send me stuff that she wrote about using ChatGPT, which I thought was cool, but I've never really used it in my daily life or medical.
Thank you, Miriam. And it sounds like Elizabeth is on, and she has never used it despite her husband using it. Elizabeth, why have you not used it?
I just wasn't sure how safe it actually was, or how who's vetting this information, especially when it comes to medical information, if I could really trust that or not.
Right.
It's not up to date that has every editor and user on it that shows you that they vetted that information.
So. Good, from trusted sources. Okay, I am going to turn over to Amit and Dan and Sanjay. If they're just our leaders of CardioNerds in general, founders of CardioNerds, do you guys ever use ChatGPT or other generative AI for anything related to medicine?
I actually use it let's say I write an email and I'll just tell it to optimize it. And if I really spent a lot of time writing the email well, then usually the things that it gives me back is not going to be additive, but sometimes it will it'll give me some tips. The other thing that I've used it for is I have some procedure templates that I basically copied and pasted into it, and it found errors. So my template that I've been having all these grammatical errors from procedure after procedure after procedure, it in an instant fixed it for me, and I put it back into my Epic, and so I've used it. So I've learned how to sort of use it to help me out a little bit. I also had it write, if I had to write up instructions for post-cath instructions, I'd be write me up some instructions, and it would write me instructions, and I would take it and change it. So it does sort of help me when I'm staring at a blank piece of paper.
Terrific. Thanks, Dan. Sanjay, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, I am sure Dan and Amit are far ahead of me on this, but I use it mostly not in medicine than in medicine. And in medicine, I use it for education. So we do a lot of convening these days. And so reading themes from multiple speakers and multiple interviews has been actually quite useful.
Thank you for that. Can I ask just one clarifying question? Do you use ChatGPT? This is good. We're going to get into this in a little bit. Do you use ChatGPT specifically for that, or you use another? Yes. Okay. All right. Great. And then Amit, we're going to end on you, and then I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about what I think on the big pictures of AI, and then we're going to go back to discussion. But why don't you end our discussion on the demographics of this CardioNerds talk?
Yeah, I'll say that Dan is definitely ahead of me in terms of using it for practical purposes. I've used ChatGPT more just out of curiosity of what its capabilities are. For instance, can it write me a procedure note for a complex interventional procedure? How well would it do to summarize a given article?
Guys, thanks so much for being honest and open and vulnerable in that. I think in our current day and age where AI seems to be the hottest thing, if you have never logged on to ChatGPT, and we have a couple people here, that is often or can be judged. And I think along the same spectrum, if you use ChatGPT for everything you do, that often can be judged. So we're talk a little bit more about ChatGPT, but I'm going to pause for a second and back up and give really a big picture of the word that Tommy started us off with, which is artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence in its use in medical education. And just so that we have some ground level understanding of the words that we are using, I want to throw out some definitions and then tell you a short story and then talk a little bit more about the specifics of what we were talking about. So artificial intelligence in general, I liken it to us creating things by machines to mimic human intelligence, right? That's the entire thing. It's artificial, and we want to create things that think like we do. It is the use of science and engineering to create human-like thinking. And within artificial intelligence, we have machine learning. And machine learning is a type of artificial intelligence that allows us to do computational methods of really a lot of language, although for many examples nowadays, we also have images and videos and audio. So it is not just language processing anymore, but that was really, I think, the history of where it started. And now we have expanded it beyond just language. That's why when we talk about machine learning, one of the biggest examples is natural language processing, or NLP, right? Natural language processing is really the computational analysis of linguistics with statistics in deep learning models, right? So it is a type of machine learning with language specifically. Obviously, there is all sorts of languages that it can be used. And then, as I said, this has now expanded beyond language to pixels, to video, to audio. And then within natural language processing, we have the large language models. And that really is an example of what the natural language processing is doing to create some of the things that we were talking about, which is ChatGPT and whatnot. And those really use words, lots and lots, and like millions upon billions of trillions of words to find patterns within the association of words in the way that we speak. So really, those should be kind of the big picture of where we are. AI is kind of like the biggest circle, machine learning, a slightly smaller circle, natural language processing down there, and then large language models down in a smaller thing. And then from those large language models, we can get things like chatbots, including things like ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is an example of generative artificial intelligence, and it's one of many. So there were a couple hands raised, and I'll pause just for a second, and people can unmute themselves and shout out what other chatbots or other generative AI that you use besides ChatGPT. And that will include 3 and 4, because I know that there are different versions of ChatGPT now. Anybody else use a different generative AI model? Alfred?
So I've used GPT-3, 3.5, and 4, and then Gemini is now built into Android phones, the ones you buy from Google. And then I've used Claude.
Claude. Yes, you and I just used that. We'll talk about Claude in a second. I think Miriam and then Ahmed, I know that you also had your hand raised a little while ago.
So I haven't used anything else except ChatGPT, but I have seen like our fellows using Perplexity.
Perplexity. Got it. Okay. Thanks, Miriam. What does that output look like? Is it still just language? Because I'm not familiar with that one.
It's like ChatGPT. I would use Claude to search it to see what it is. But I saw that he used it in CATLab to show me how Impele works, and then I found it interesting. So, but like I'm new to that, so I have to just figure out.
Thanks, Miriam. And Ahmed, I see you in the chat saying Gemini, BART, Bing, and Dolly. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with these, please do not get hung up on these words. We're going to talk about this in a little second, but I just want to be kind of open that there are many chatbots out there. Dolly specifically, Ahmed, thanks for bringing that up. The image generator. So again, generative AI is a bigger picture. It can generate anything. And many of the chatbots, example, yes, Dolly is now in ChatGPT 4, which requires you to pay a fee every single month. So many of these, when they are the better or the newer models, they will cost some money. So we'll talk a little bit about that. You know, generative AI really also, there are some other ones that are medical specific. And before I really kind of get too far into that, I just want to tell this story, mostly because for those of you listening, you know me as not the tech person, nor am I like a statistical expert by any means. I don't do large language modeling. I don't do modeling of any sorts, either the ones that require makeup or fancy dresses, nor the modeling that requires understanding of heavy statistics. That is just not who I am. I'm out there, not the AI expert, really just a curious medical educator. One of the stories that I wanted to tell everybody before we get too deep into ChatGPT really starts with me, as I was saying, not being an expert and being a passionate medical educator, and how I got to know Missy and Alfred in this space. I've known them much longer than this, but this is why I have stuck them with me in this space, is because about a year and a half ago, I was signed up to give one of the University of Pittsburgh's entire School of Medicine medical educator talks. And it was December of 2022. And it was right when ChatGPT was getting a ton of news articles and other attention. And I started, kind of being curious about it. And I was anxious about giving a talk to medical educators who I often think of as, smarter and more skilled and experienced than myself. They are awesome. And so I wasn't about to give a talk to them about feedback or, other common themes in medical education. I was like, man, I don't know what I can teach them. And then it hit me that I didn't know anything about ChatGPT. And my guess was that many of these medical educators didn't know anything about ChatGPT, or if they did, very few of them knew much about it. And it was also around the time where there was a lot of the newspaper articles that were talking about running MCSAP questions and other medical MCAT questions, those types of questions through ChatGPT and seeing if it could pass or what score it could get. And so all of a sudden I was like, man, this might be really important for us to understand. And so I taught myself a ton over a month period. And I will tell you, at that point in time, when I had done a PubMed search, there were 5 articles that had ChatGPT in 2022. And I just did this search today. There were, in 2023 total, ChatGPT PubMed with 259 articles. And already in 2024, ChatGPT can be found in 285 PubMed articles. So as you could tell, this is really accelerating incredibly quickly, and this is just in PubMed. And so I gave this talk in January of 2023, and Missy and Alfred were both on, and they were so kind to be interested in the topic. And we talked really about what it is, what we can and can't do with it at that point in time, and really what I called finding your spirit animal for ChatGPT, which is really recognizing how you yourself as a medical educator react to the concept of learners in medical school or medical training using ChatGPT or other generative AI. And we had a range of reactions of faculty on that call. And I think Missy is on one end of the spectrum, although she was not the severest. She was actually very curious and engaged. Alfred was far end on the, I've used it, I'm very curious, and I want to think a lot about this. And there were a couple others that were, this is never going to happen. I don't know why we're talking about this, which is the animal that I called the ostrich, because I liken that to putting your head in the sand, denying the fact that any of this is happening. So we will see, I hope, by the end of this talk, where everybody falls on that spectrum as to what your spirit animal is with regards to ChatGPT and other generative AI. What I talked about then, though, was really that there are these medical chatbots and really medical language models that are being created so that enhance the way we use it in medicine for healthcare, but also for medical education. Some of the ones that didn't get mentioned, there's something called MedPalm, and there is also a PubMed GPT that I think Stanford has, and I don't know if it's available. I think it's only built on PubMed GPT or PubMed Abstract. So there are things that are out there. There is now currently an updated MedPalm, which is, again, generative AI based on a lot of data used specifically and vetted for medicine, and then creating a model that would be more accurate for medical care and healthcare. So there's this large spectrum. I think many of us read and are on social media, the newspaper and on social media, and ChatGPT really has the brand that is most recognized. And really that is the one that when you are first curious, many go to in the beginning. I'll pause for a second and just say, as I was thinking about this, I was like, and I think it's Miriam that was talking about this, I was really like, maybe I'm sure that this is safe. I'm not convinced that this is the thing that we should do. And similar to some of the people who shared experiences of playing with ChatGPT, I did a handful of things. I mean, I immediately signed up for a ChatGPT username and, made a password and all those things. And the first thing I did was kind of ask it some silly questions, such as like describe the physiology of a normal cardiac cycle and stuff like that, which was fine. I asked it to write me a question about pregnancy and anticoagulation, which I was like, let's see how this goes. It did. It gave me an output of a multiple choice question. And then when it gave me the answer, it was wrong, actually. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe not. It generated a question, but then it gave me the wrong answer. So I'm not exactly sure about that. I didn't know enough at that point in time to go back and to train it. So I was not really a savvy user. I can't say that I am a savvy user at this point. But I did then say, man, if I was in medical school and really stressed about my personal statement, which I was when I was in medical school, writing my personal statement. And again, I was still anxious about writing my personal statement in residency. And again, even now, if I have to write personal statements, those things they increase anxiety in everybody. So I was like, I wonder what it would write for me. And so I asked it to write my personal statement with the prompt of write a personal statement for an application for, a woman who went to Ohio State for medical school, applying to internal medicine, right? And kind of gave the entire prompt. And it spit out within 10 seconds, a full page, to which I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. And nobody's ever going to write their own personal statements anymore. Right. And at the same time, my son, who was a freshman in high school, was also not writing many of his own English papers. Right. So this is something that came across, I think, to all educators and to all students at the same time. And then, putting on back on to being the medical educator and being like, man, what are some of the things that are a little like chores for me, like homework that I don't love to do now as a program director or as faculty? And to be honest, it's a chore to write a letter of recommendation. I'm always so happy to really advocate for the people that have been on service with me. But it is hard, right? And it takes time and you want to make them special and unique for every single person. And so I asked it to write me a letter of recommendation. And then all of a sudden it could do that, to which I was like, man, it got my multiple choice questions wrong, but it was writing my letters of recommendation. So ping-ponging really back and forth, and I think fast forward to now where many of us have used ChatGPT. I know a handful of people, and Ronaldo, it sounds like you were one of those people who might have ChatGPT on the side running as they are doing some of their day-to-day work. And Dan, it sounds like you're a fairly frequent user to have it rewrite things or to come up with text for you. So all of those things are really great and common. One of the things that I get frustrated with, though, is that there really still isn't a ton of evidence. In medical education, our research has really grown significantly over the past number of decades. There's a number of people here on this podcast today who have published in medical education, and Missy McNeil is one of the leaders in medical education scholarship and has taught many of us how to write papers and to think about how we teach and how we learn and how we quantify those things and what the outcomes of those things are. But they're really, still to this day limited. I actually was just prepping for this talk today, searches, right, to see in PubMed how many articles are out there about actual studies. And I would say there's a lot of articles out there that talk about the strengths and the weaknesses and opportunities and threats. And there's not a ton out there that give finite examples. That said, I will tell you that Dylan Fortman, who is an outgoing chief resident here at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, actually, I stumbled onto an abstract that he just presented at a national conference about using ChatGPT in morning report. And so, getting those user examples is really, I think, important as we think about what this means for medical education. And I'll pause here just also for a second and say, today we're going to talk about AI in med ed, not AI in healthcare or patient care or clinical uses. And I think some of the people who spoke in the very beginning, giving us examples of what they use it, that really is what people are using it for nowadays, easily is that. And that's really not where we're going today, because I think that's an entire different topic with different strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. So before I invite Missy and Alfred on to talk a little bit more about their thoughts on generative AI in medical education, I want to just list a handful of things that I think of with regards to the strengths and weaknesses of this technology in medical education. Some of the strengths have been provided already. So some of the strengths that I think of is that this can create virtual cases for you. You can type in a prompt to say, write a case, right, for us. It can simulate clinical scenarios or change it slightly. If you're a student, you can create new flashcards and quizzes with this. And I think in the future, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, it can, I think, also act as a tutor and a coach, or it has potential to. I'm not completely convinced that it actually can do that quite yet accurately, but I think in the future, it will truly do that. With regards to the other things, just in general, the concepts of it, it's fairly scalable. It's mostly accessible, though when you start to add on the better versions are more expensive. I think that the ChatGPT-4, and I know that ChatGPT-5, the newest model, is coming out. And I'm pretty sure those are anywhere from $20 to $40 a month. So not inexpensive at all. And I think in general, when we think about all of those pluses, the extension of that is that it also potentially could decrease our work as medical educators. It could allow us to work more one-on-one with students, with learners, with trainees. And so there's a lot of potential, and I'm very excited about that potential. I also want to caution us because some of the criticism and the fear that has been discussed with regards to generative AI and other AI in general in medical education is that, there's this question as to the accuracy of the information that it provides. As you can imagine, these chatbots are trained on certain language models. Most of the early, especially ChatGPT, was trained on the internet, right? And everything in the internet. And we all know that the internet has a fair amount of bad information that is in it or inaccurate information. And so when we translate that to medicine and human care, that presents a huge cautionary tale as to whether or not this would be something that we should use. As an educator in a space where I practice cardiology and it is, something that we use our hands with, and Dan, I'm sure that you are thinking about this, you can't learn how to do a cath by just going and using ChatGPT or those things. So there's no hands-on practice in any of these models. It potentially might make us more reliant on technology than we should or need to. And there is a lack of human interaction or real human interaction. I'll caution us and say that these models and the addition of video interactivity, it's getting pretty good. So at some point, they might be able to simulate real human interaction. I think there are examples of this. I don't know of any in the medical world, but really, VR, virtual reality coming up and using that. There actually is a virtual reality software that has been used to train people to learn about their biases. And so we actually do this at the American College of Cardiology scientific sessions at our Health Equity Hub. There's a virtual reality experience there that you can put on and really see a VR patient and interact and learn different things about your interaction with a variety of different patients. So it's coming, that human interaction, but it's still not human, real, and in life. And then the last thing that I will talk about with regards to, the threat or the weakness in general of ChatGPT and generative AI is the concept that relates to how we learn in general. And so I'm going to bring Missy and Alfred on after I comment on this, because this is something that we've talked a little bit about. And really, when we think about ourselves as medical educators, we really ground ourselves in the foundational principles of adult learning, right? So understanding the theory that lays behind adult learning is really important. And we know that Missy is constantly talking about this. Learning takes effort, right? It should be a little bit uncomfortable. And when we use ChatGPT and other generative AI, sometimes that decreases our discomfort and decreases the amount that we stretch or struggle. And so with that, I will pause, because that really is the tension that I have in my head with regards to where the future of this lies and how careful we need to be about the use of these tools in medical education moving forward. So Missy and Alfred, I welcome you back to the conversation. I am incredibly curious. Neither of you are cardiologists, so we will say that, but I think you are outstanding medical educators yourselves. So there are a lot of cardiologists or cardiologists to be listening to this podcast. And I know Many of them will know of you and think highly of your responses. Miffy, I'm going to go to you first. That tension that we've talked about with regards to learning, what makes you nervous about ChatGPT and that concept of adult learning that you should struggle in order to actually learn something?
That totally is where I would have started this conversation, because I think, what is very clear about educational pedagogy is that in order to think, you have to know things to think about. And the way that you get information that you're learning and studying from your short-term memory into your long-term memory is that you use it over and over and over again. It's the analogy of the path in the woods, right? So if everything is, we are, as our students are learners, so much want the easy way out. They want to know what they need to know on the test. They will break up. We can go to clinical problem solvers, for example, and see all of the fabulous algorithms about how to work up a problem. That's great. But what's better is if a learner makes their own algorithm, their own heuristic. Because when you do the work, you both make the path deeper and more robust, but you also figure out where you're off track.
Yeah.
Well, one of the problems with using a generative AI is that, one, it's very easy. Two, if you get it wrong, it's really hard to know where and how and why. Now, perhaps, you alluded to the adaptive AI. Maybe at some point AI will give me a case and I will give it the diagnosis, and AI will say, no, that's wrong. Why did you think that? And, get that conversation that you're using. So I think we have to be careful about what it's going to do. I also worry, as we move to thinking about it more, and that there was conversation in the chat about helping us diagnose it, right?
Yeah.
Giving us the backbone. If I can't put it together, maybe I'll put in, what's going on and see what it says. And I would just caution us that the backbone of good clinical reasoning diagnosis is the information we put in, which is the history and physics. So garbage in, garbage out, right? So that's where I worry. I also want to just say, I think that AI is here to stay.
Yeah.
I think it reminds me of how my generation felt about Wikipedia when Wikipedia came out. We were completely appalled that our medical students would go to Wikipedia to look up information, and it's great for foreground information. So using it wisely is key, and how we help our learners learn to use it, I think, is actually the challenge for us as educators.
And thanks, Missy. I think you're hitting on two of the important points, which is, one, it's here to stay. And two, as educators, we need to not only think about how we would potentially use this, but also what our learners are already doing, no matter what we plan to do as educators. Alfred, I'm going to turn it over to you. Are there ways around this? If you were, I know you are a savvy medical educator who tries to incorporate things like this into education, what are the things that you think we could do as medical educators on a day-to-day standpoint to utilize this in a responsible fashion?
Yeah, I think as educators, we're not just educators, we're clinician educators or clinician educator researchers or some combination of those things. And there's a lot of boring stuff I do every day. I have to write my note, I have to do the billing. And at the conference I was at, they actually had a demonstration where they had someone just invent a random medical problem. So someone just thought of their favorite book, which was Alice in Wonderland, and they made Alice in Wonderland syndrome. And the person pretended to have this syndrome, and they recorded a conversation with the panelist over Teams, fed that into GPT, and it wrote a perfect HNP with a differential.
Yeah.
So I think it can save us a lot of time. I use it, like I said, when I'm brainstorming ideas for questions. I mean, that stuff took me forever in the past. And now it can give me a list of 10 questions that are pretty reasonable, and then I can modify them. So one thing I was going to say, taking a much more global perspective, like thinking about the audience of this podcast, I imagine a lot of people are going to become leaders and program directors or fellowship directors. And there was a conference I went to with Missy Aptum, and we talked about using GPT to write letters of recommendations, which are, again, one of those really boring things that we do where it can save us time. And I was thinking about it. At this point, step one is pass fail. A lot of schools have pass fail for third and fourth years. And, pretty much everyone is pass fail for the first two. And we were talking about, can you use Chat GPT to write a letter of recommendation? And probably people are starting to do that. The room was sort of split on whether you should cite it. And at the end of the presentation, someone from the audience who was an expert on this came up and said he actually is part of a new company that's using AI to evaluate medical students' applications and residency applications. And so we're going to get to the point where you have applications that are mostly written by AI being evaluated by AI. And that's interesting to me. I think that's a big pitfall because it's AI evaluating AI.
It is. Yeah. And I think nowadays there's also generative AI creating more data to feed back into the models, because crazy that this is the state that we are in, but we are quickly running out of data, which is fascinating. I personally think that there are going to be many large institutions, academic medical centers, and others that have data on patients are going to be able to make their own models for their own institution or their own area to help with population healthcare and whatnot to guide some of us. But I think those days are still a little ways out there. As a program director, Alfred, I think cardiology fellowship applications, I'm sure many who are listening are probably in the midst of writing, prepping, and thinking about that. And it makes me incredibly nervous to think that I would take that information and put it into a model. And that really brings up some of the ethical and safety issues that I didn't hit on when we were talking about the weaknesses and threats. But there is a lot with regards to HIPAA safety and ethics in medicine specifically, that I think is why our area has been a lot slower than many of the other non-medical areas in today's society. That is why we have not adopted this writ large across the way, because it represents a fair amount. And I would caution anybody who's listening and ready to play that putting your patient's specific information into a model, we don't always know what happens with the data that we put into the chatbots, even into the prompt areas, and those things can be then put back in. And so you might be sharing somebody's personal or private information. So be very careful and thoughtful about those things so that you don't create a breach of privacy for your patients as we think about it in a care standpoint. I'm going to just end here with Missy and Alfred, and then I'm hopeful that Dr. Desai will join us for a couple moments, because I have some questions for him too. He's written on this topic in a number of ways. But Missy, you said that the one thing that you wanted people to know is that this is here to stay. Is there anything else with regards to a takeaway that you would want faculty or other educators to know, clinician educators specifically, about?
This is not a great analogy, but work with me here. It reminds me of when we copy, paste, and edit a note. To me, and unfortunately, what has now happened is just copy and paste, right?
Right.
And so I think the danger of this, again, for example, the National Board will not let you use this to generate any questions.
So side note, Missy has been a question writer for a number of years. She is an expert question writer.
And when we write questions for the National Board, we write the questions, they go out for vetting, they come back, the whole committee talks about it. We make sure that asking what we mean to ask, which does not happen on exams at an institutional level. I want to share 2 quick anecdotes about letters. When Alfred and I presented nationally about can ChatGPT write letters, It's interesting. The bot is very aware of bias. So you can't put in it's an African American student. You can put in it's a student who's an underrepresented minority. And we gave an underrepresented minority, we had it write a letter, and it wrote the letter, talked about their grades and everything. But it also wrote a whole paragraph about the difficult background that they came from and how they'd overcome all these obstacles, none of which was in the information we gave it.
Interesting.
Right? So again, it goes to the internet, it looks at what's out there for underrepresented minorities. This is often a case, and so it made it into the letter. Conversely, when we were doing a letter by the study, having it evaluate letters,
Yeah.
I've written a letter for an underrepresented minority who was fabulous, who was just fabulous, and I had every superlative adjective in the letter. But I had deliberately not highlighted her objective numbers because they're not in what we would consider the top of the pack. And in the absence of objective data, which the internet tells ChatGPT is what gets you into residency, he was ranked in the lower tertile.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's being used and it's out there. And we just have to be really, really careful.
Yeah. And I think for those who are advanced generative AI people, nowadays there are things called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, which really is contextualizing the language that is in there. And this is really an effort to try to decrease the hallucinations. And also, as Missy has identified, textualize the information in a paragraph or in a letter that you give it, so that hopefully in the future, for the models that do have RAG in it, it would then, you could say, deprioritize the numbers and prioritize the qualitative information in there. Thanks, Missy, for those stories and examples. And Alfred, anything that you would like our listeners to take away from this conversation about AI and its role in medical education?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Missy. I mean, I think we are reading more and more about it in the news. Joe Biden has like an entire AI task force now. And it's sort of amazing because it's this new technology that only came out 2 years ago. I mean, there's no application in human history that's had this level of growth, both in terms of users and sophistication. So it's definitely here to stay. I don't know when it's going to replace us or take over the world, like when it's going to turn into Terminator. But I think in the meantime, it's not going to replace medical school. We still need to know what we're doing, because I think it works best when it's used as a partner, not as a replacement.
A perfect way to end, because I think one of the things that I am convinced is that I too believe it is here to stay. And I think we should use it both with curiosity and caution, and hope that we develop ways to use it collaboratively so that humans and artificial intelligence and the means of it in medicine really are collaborative, and that we use it in ways to make ourselves better, and that we don't use it, specifically do not use it, when we know that it could make us make bad decisions or harm others, especially in medicine. With that, I'm going to bring Dr. Desai on. Sanjay, it was really a treat when I heard that you were going to attend this. It was quite an honor to give a lecture in your name. And I am sure that you have a ton of thoughts on this. For those who have not read his papers on precision education, this is where I really want to turn the conversation to now and talk what I am most excited about now, which is adaptive learning, and how we do adaptive learning with artificial intelligence. And we get to the end being precision education, which I liken to precision medicine. We talk about that a lot, and precision medicine for our patients. And Sanjay has talked and written a lot about precision education. So Sanjay, I would love to hear your thoughts on things up till now about how it relates to the future of medical education.
Thank you. I've learned so much, actually. This has been a really wonderful, and seeing so many familiar faces, but you and Alfred and Missy in particular. Thank you for all of the comments. I'll keep my comments very brief. This is our focus of activity, is precision education, which includes AI-driven or enabled learning and assessment. And maybe I'll just comment, sort of taking, I think Alfred's sort of taking a step back. I think for us, the way that we're thinking about this is taking a big step back for medical education. And why does it even exist? And it exists we think to produce a physician workforce that's capable of meeting the needs of our patients and our communities. And we know that right now it's not meeting all of those needs. And so there have been a couple of what I think has been described nicely as wicked problems in medical education that would help us achieve the physician workforce that we need in the country. And I think easy ones to understand are competency-based education. So we have a time-based model, and we know we need to move to a competency-based model, but that requires assessment that we're unable to do at scale right now. I think the other one is equity. Katie, you brought this up. Equity is a big challenge, and it continues to be a challenge because of how deeply rooted it is into our structures and into our processes. And so those are just two examples, but I think that this opportunity with the inflection point we're at with technology and with the use of data that I think, or at least I'm hopeful, we have an opportunity to break through some barriers that have held us from advancing and implementing competency-based education at scale or delivering assessments in ways that are more feasible, that are more frequent, that can be done in no touch or light touch mechanisms, or that can be done in the workplace, which has been a real challenge for us moving forward. And so I'm hopeful that these technologies, AI in particular, can help us personalize in a much more effective way the assessment and programming that we do. You mentioned coaching, Katie. I think that's a really tremendous opportunity for us to develop coaching at scale. I think efficiency in our education, I know this is a cardiology-based group, and there's no better audience to think about how to be more efficient in the numbers of hours and training that's required to achieve that mastery that you have. But the opportunity for just-in-time training, for patient-relevant training, because so much of what we receive is not necessarily relevant for the patient that I personally will see tomorrow. And I think the last one I would mention is agency, the opportunity to really try to transfer power of learning back to the learner and learner in the structured environments that we are all in and often teach in. But I would say even more so for those that are in practice, which is the long arc of our careers, and to give us power to be able to learn in an effective way. I think these technologies have already been demonstrated to do some of this. And I think that that's where I see the real opportunity. And you mentioned a lot of things to be cautious about, and I would agree with all of those. And I would add the other one that we're particularly interested in pursuing is some understanding of principles and standards in the space related to medical education. And I think the more that you hear about innovations in the space, you hear about the same groups of people. And it's not surprising because this is a high resource intensive activity right now. And so I think the opportunity to make sure that we innovate in a way that allows replicability and scalability such that everyone can benefit from these innovations is really important as well. So I'll hold my comments there, but I'm really excited about everything that I've heard and all of the excitement on this in this group.
Oh, thanks, Sanjay. To hear your thoughts is always fascinating for me, and I think really inspiring for many that are listening. I'll leave a couple comments and requests. I always love anytime that I give a talk. My goal is to change behavior and really to inspire then anyone who listens to try something new and different. And my hope is that anyone who is listening, if you haven't tried a generative chatbot, I would love for you to get on, whether it's ChatGPT or Cloud or any of the other models that we talked about today, and just play. Really, honestly, thinking about playing first, which I think, Tommy, you really identified yourself as somebody who's just playing in the space, right? I think that's phase one. Phase two is really like, okay, I'm ready to actually apply this to my daily life. And then phase three is really thinking about the true case scenarios that we think about in medical education. As a sidebar in this, what I think is really interesting is what Sanjay was talking about, which really is getting to the precision education is really the use of analytics in learning applied directly to you as an individual so that we can advance your training and your competency in a number of those ways. Some of the things that exist, and I have not seen anything in medical education out there, but hopefully, Duolingo is a company that's here in Pittsburgh, and they have an app, and anybody who has played Duolingo, you now know what adaptive learning is, right? So that is an entire example of what adaptive learning is. And my hope is that we get to some things like that in medical education, that we have abilities to use with our learners. And the last thing I'll say, and Sanjay, you were talking about it, you and I are both excited about coaches and tutors in the medical education space. And, I've seen some online things that you can present online and it will give you kind of feedback about your presentation. I think it's much more, PowerPoint or pitches. But my hope is in the future that we can use that for something like our medical students and their presentation of patients on rounds or something. But there's also something called Conmigo, which is by the Khan Academy. I think many people know Saul Khan. He was the founder of the Khan Academy, and which is, a large free open online courses. And they've created this online portion of that, which is really tutoring and also coaching for even educators. So for those of you who are really interested in playing, I would encourage you to go look at those things and see if you can be inspired to bring it back to medical education. And my very last thing is a plea for anybody who is listening and interested in medical education to do some research. Get your hands dirty in this space so that we can understand it, so that Sanjay can make those best practices and some policies guiding us so that it is not only beneficial for the future, but also safe for our patients. And with that, I will turn it back to Tommy and others to help us see our way out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Berlacher. And thank you to everyone today for being here and for this discussion and just giving us so much to think about, so much to chew on in terms of this topic, because it is going to be here to stay. And I think the way that we interface with it and the way that we see this as an opportunity to make what we do and what we're passionate about, which is really teaching and teaching people what we're passionate about, which is taking care of patients and learning how to use this tool to do that better, I think is the goal here. And I think that what we've discussed today in terms of all the opportunities just really hammer that home. How do we delight in the difficulties of working on a statement, working on a recommendation where we still get the benefit of reflecting on that while we work on that, while also streamlining the processes that we need to do so that we can spend more time with other tasks that require that one-on-one attention. And there's so much here to talk about and so much to chat on. And I think this has been a great high-level discussion. I'm just so thankful for everyone for being here. I do want to end this talk today with just a little CardioNerds tradition, which is we often ask our guests what makes their heart flutter and the topic of the day. And I think today I'd like to ask our guests if they could go around and just say what makes their heart flutter about the future of medical education.
Oh, man. What still makes my heart flutter is humans. And the humans that I'm staring at today, really brings me joy because I have had wonderful experience with some of these people, not only in CardioNerds, but also University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, but also a ton of hope for the future because our CardioNerds Chiefs, rising Chiefs, really are the people who are going to take care of me when I get older and need it. So that it really still, despite the fact that we have spent our entire time talking about technology and computers, it is still humans that makes my heart flutter.
Katie, you basically stole what I was going to say.
Why you go first? Alfred, always
No, I started, we were talking about coaching. We have a new coaching program as part of our new curriculum, and you get to know a small group of students, 9 or 10, from when they enter medical school till they graduate, and you see them at least once a month. That brings me a ton of joy. My heart will flutter when I take them out for drinks, I guess.
There you go. I will answer from a little different perspective as someone who's been doing it for a very long time. And I will say, having trained both Katie and Alfred, people I train and the doctors they become is what makes my heart flutter. When you think about as an educator, when I mentor people, everybody said mentors, now we all have coaches, but when I mentor people, I say, you have to figure out where you want to leave your footprints in the sand, as in when you're gone, what's behind you. For some people, it's one patient at a time, right? Making them feel better. For our researchers, it's what they contribute to medical knowledge. For me as a teacher, it's the way I impact the care of the patients yet to come by the physicians I train. And so what makes my heart flutter as an old educator is knowing that the next generation is really in fine shape and forward.
What's making my heart flutter right now and the Zoom screen that I see in front of me, it is the legacy of medical educators, right? I mean, I'll tell you the impact that both Sanjay and Katie have had on Dan and myself on CardioNerds is incredible. I mean, I know for a fact that CardioNerds would not exist right now if it weren't for all the time and mentorship that Sanjay had invested in us. And after CardioNerds was born, it was truly the after that Katie messaged me and Dan and said, hey, I just want to be a resource for you. Let me know how I can help you. Open-ended, just being willing to share herself. And if there's anyone on this call who's benefited at all from CardioNerds, just know that this is the legacy of a medical educator. You gave yourself to one individual, and then you carry that legacy forward and touch others based on that. And I think that's largely what Missy was saying, but that's what I'm seeing right now. That's what's making my heart flutter right now.
That's fantastic. And I can't think of a better note to end on, especially as we transition from our graduating Academy class to our incoming class of Academy Fellows. So I just want to take this moment to say thank you all so much for being here and for teaching us all today. I've learned an incredible amount that I'll take with me in my practice as an educator, as a learner, as a physician, as a clinician, et cetera. So I just am so grateful for the opportunity to hear from everyone today.
Thanks for tuning in to another CardioNerds episode. The audio editing for this episode was performed by me, Pace Wetstein. I am an intern in the CardioNerds Academy, House Jones, and an MS1 at LeCom Seton Hill. I invite you to check out the episode page for show notes and references. If you found this episode informative, please consider subscribing to CardioNerds on your favorite podcast platform and leaving us a review. It helps us spread the word and further our goal to democratize cardiovascular education. Finally, this podcast is not meant to be used for medical advice. The views expressed on our show and site do not reflect the opinions or policies of our employers. All CardioNerds content is planned, produced, and reviewed solely by CardioNerds. Stay tuned for more engaging conversations and explorations in our upcoming episodes. And now, it's time to make like an S2 and split.